Hello, kia ora, and welcome. I'm Stephanie, the Events and Learning Coordinator for RCSA, and welcome to our live attendees, our digital past community, and to those who are watching this webinar as a recording. RCSA acknowledges the traditional custodians of the various lands from which we all work on and meet today. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and we extend that respect to all First Nations people present today. Our session today considers the value proposition of working retained, and over the next 60 minutes, we will hear from our panel of industry leaders who will share their insights and value add for you, the agency, the client, and the candidate involved. A reminder that our live session is being recorded and will be made available as an on-demand learning resource to all RCSA members. To those joining our live broadcast, I encourage you to make the most of this learning experience and engage with us using the comments or questions. Those functions are available to you at the bottom center of your screen. We welcome your comments and questions at any time, and the questions submitted will be addressed during our live Q&A. Should you experience any technical difficulties, please use the comment function to message me directly, and I'll do what I can to assist you. Moderating our discussion is Nina Mapson-Bone, RCSA Life Member, President of RCSA, and Managing Director of Beaumont People. Nina understands the challenges and complexities of driving growth and ensuring a customer-first approach in large, diverse businesses. So she's in an excellent position to discuss working retained. Welcome, Nina. Thank you for joining us and for moderating today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Great to be here for a topic I'm very passionate about. And to Stephanie's acknowledgement of country, we are on many lands today, and I'll explain that in a moment. So let me introduce the panel, and you'll understand what I mean by that. I'll start with Susie, because Susie is in Melbourne, and Susie holds a passion for people and recruitment. She is the CEO of 6 Degrees Executive. She's the first female CEO. She took the reins in 2019 from co-founder Paul Hallam and brings a wealth of expertise in the retained space to us here from Melbourne. Welcome, Susie. Then we have at 7:30 in the morning, Jackie all the way from Singapore, joining us live from Singapore. Jackie Barrett with 25 years in the industry. I think I'm only a couple of years behind you, Jackie. I'm trying to avoid the clock over to the 25 year
Well,
mark.
I'm actually getting close to 30 and I'm thinking I'll go with 25 because it makes me feel good.
Let's stick with 25. You're always been 25 years, but Jackie's obviously had a very successful career in the recruitment industry, and she set up SALT in 2003, and her outstanding contribution to the industry was recognised by her peers with a life membership to the RCSA, and she is a fellow of the RCSA. So again, recruitment runs through her blood and has a lot of passion for the retained space. And then even further afield, joining us at midnight from the UK is Louise Archer. What a panel, an all-female, all-international panel here. Louise Archer, who runs a business called Retrain Search, live from her UK studio. She's the founder of Retrain Search, and having worked on the front line of recruitment for 20 years and having been a contingent recruiter before transitioning to retained, she truly understands the struggles that companies face with working retained, and hence set up her business to help organisations know how to make the move. And this is a subject that I'm passionate about. It's a subject I've worked on with the RCSA when I became president, because for me, it's a model that we should all be doing. Just share a personal story before we get into the panel. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about this is that I had always believed retained search was an executive search model. For a big chunk of my career, that's what I thought it was. And when I joined Beaumont People, my day job 7 years ago, I was blown away by the fact that they were doing retained at every level. They would hire receptionists retained. They were doing retained at all sorts of things. And it really shifted my mindset. It was a great learning for me to see that retained could be done across all different roles at all different levels. And so we're here today to share how you can make some of those changes for yourself, how you can think about what to do differently, and also some of the nuances and some of the challenges that come up with it. But let's start, and Jackie, I'm going to fire this first question at you. Let's just start with a basic position of understanding, just for those out there that may not have worked this way before. What is working retained, and why are we encouraging it?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to start with why we're encouraging it, I think, first of all. And I think I'll talk from SALT's perspective, and then I think that ties into where the RCSA is going anyway, because I think as an industry, we've done a lot of free work and we want to move away from that and shift our thinking to the value that we bring, valuing ourselves for the contribution we make and valuing the contribution we make to our candidates and clients. So as a business, a few years ago, we talked about how do we improve our delivery to the next level, and We're big believers in the Net Promoter Score, and we use it on every job we work on, every candidate we interview, regardless of outcomes. So to continue to drive our delivery and satisfaction levels up, we thought, what is it that you need to do that? And ultimately, in our mind, was about partnerships, right? And to really have a true partnership and a deep understanding of your customer, we found that working in a lot of contingent ways and very sometimes multi-listed ways was a hard slog. And you couldn't, how do you feel special and how do you form a partnership when there's 5 of you in the relationship, right? If they're using 4 other recruiters and you, it's not conducive to a great outcome for anybody, for internally or for the candidate or for the client. So it was, for us, it was driven by improvement in delivery, and I can tell you that's worked. So our fill rates have improved as a business, our NPS score has improved in the business, and probably the most pleasing for us is our we do our employee engagement survey every year, and we've just had the best results in 5 years. And I do believe it's because people are feeling that what they're doing is making a difference, and they are feeling more confident and valued as a result of it. So that's the why. What is it? I'm going to be a little bit crazy, I think, and say more about what it's not. And so to me, it's not a pricing model. And we've talked about this, I guess, touched on a little bit as a panel. To me, it's more about a value and performance model. It's about a model that allows you to build that deep understanding with your customer with clear timelines and deliverables to get an outcome for everybody. Now, we can go into all the different parts of it, but ultimately what it is for us. It's a performance and value model as opposed to a pricing model.
Thanks, Jackie. Sorry, Susie, were you going to add something?
No, that was great.
Just agreeing. I heard you agreeing, so I wasn't sure if there was a comment there. So maybe, Louise, I can ask you then. Obviously, you train agencies on this. What are some of the common reasons that people don't move to retained? And maybe if you could just, for the real basics, what's the standard model of retained as well? But what are the reasons people don't move to it?
One of the main reasons is fear, is a lack of confidence that they don't know what they should be doing. And that lack of knowledge around it erodes the confidence or means that they don't build the confidence in being able to do it, which creates the fear of failure or the fear of getting it wrong. Which is particularly prevalent in women, if I might add that. We don't like getting it wrong, and it was the reason I didn't sell it for many years, because I didn't really know what it was. And it ties into what Jackie was saying, in that so many people, their perception of it is that it's money up front. And if that's all you believe about it, how on earth can you sell that to a client? It's very, very difficult, and that is what most people believe. So I find most contingent recruiters don't sell it because they don't know what it is. And so there's the fear of selling themselves into something that they just don't know. I do come across a lot of people who have had a go though, and they have blagged it or winged it, as they tell me. And I've managed to do a few, but I don't really know what I'm doing. And what ends up happening is it ends up crumbling further down the line, because they might have won a retained project, but they're not quite sure what it should look like, or what happens when they hit some bumps in the road, and what happens if they can't find the candidate that they've sold it by promising to find. And it starts to, and then they kind of retreat back into their contingent ways. So even those that have had a go often then retreat back to a contingent model for that fear of getting it wrong or not really knowing what they should be doing.
Can I just add to that, Nina? Because I think the other fear, and I think maybe this comes from owners or the managers of businesses sometimes, is the fear of missing out. They've had this concept that we can't work that way, we've got to have everything. So they they're not as comfortable to say, no, we don't need that type of business, and we're prepared to walk away from that. So I think that, we've got to be in to win type of mentality. I want everything, rather than being comfortable to say it's okay to less can be more,
So let me
That's so true.
Let me pick up on that theme, Jackie, and put a question to Susie, because that fear of missing out, we're worried that the clients won't give us the job if we say we only work retained. So what are the benefits to the client, Susie? Why is it better for a client to work retained?
Yeah, and I think that the answering that question with confidence is ultimately the key opportunity to switch that client's view in terms of making sure that they, in fact, are not missing out on the opportunity to arrive at a better quality outcome, a better, deeper, more thorough process, which ultimately should give them the confidence that that the candidate that will get that job is the best candidate in market, because they have taken the time and committed to a partnership to ultimately shore up that outcome. So yeah, I think that describing the value proposition to a client with confidence and having them truly understand that FOMO should be about missing out on that opportunity to partner in a really quality manner for an outcome, versus the FOMO that might exist with this concept of a race for CVs or speed over quality. So and to add to what the others have said, there's absolutely, and we've heard this before, that this is not something that is common in our industry, or this is not something that our clients generally do. And from my perspective, the opportunity there is what an amazing way to differentiate yourself, and what an amazing way to establish a value proposition that perhaps your competitors in that market have missed the opportunity to. So yeah, I agree with everything that everyone said, but ultimately the absolute confidence and belief that you get a better outcome for your clients by working retained is ultimately what unlocks the opportunity to really genuinely sell that proposition to clients and have them agree.
So how do you, sorry, go on, Jackie.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the things I think that's perhaps undervalued, or not perhaps thought of so much in the outcome for the client or benefit to the client, is about their own brand management through the process. When you work on a retained basis, I think you have a much better opportunity to control the narrative. And I think people forget about that brand experience. It's the same as I say to candidates, but I also say to clients, if you're spreading your work out there to every man and his dog or every woman's dog, you can't control what people are saying about your brand. Your brand tends to get diluted because mixed messages are happening. But also something a lot of people don't consider, and I was talking to a senior executive at a bank yesterday afternoon, and I said to him, every time you engage with another agency, and it's for a very let's say it's a particularly niche role, and this was in the tech space, I said, there's only so many of XYZ people in the market with that skill set potentially. And every time someone calls them, their salary just increased, I'm now worth this, so you're driving the salary inflation with this sort of behavior, but you're also not controlling the narrative. And one of the things I think, if you're doing a really good job from a retained perspective, is you are the storyteller for that brand, right? And that's one of the differentiators. It's not, I've got a job description and I'm sending you a job description to read. I mean, I never do that anyway, but this is about building that brand story and taking your story to market. And I can tell you from a global perspective, we had a company come here from London, setting up in Southeast Asia. They'd already gone to the market once, couldn't find what they wanted, then came to us. Don't like being second, but did. And I quickly identified what their problem was. It was that nobody knew their brand in this market. So we had to create a campaign and a story to give people confidence about who they were and what they do. This is a great part of what you can do when you have that commitment and partnership from a retained purpose, as opposed to, I can go on the website and I can find out about XYZ, but I want to bring the owners to life and their story and the journey and what they're doing next. That's the stuff. That's the value. And if you get that, and I think if the changes I've seen in my time in recruitment is that recruitment is like marketing today. If you don't understand who your target audience and where they're at, then you don't know how to go and find them and have that engaged conversation, right? And that's the value to our client. This is not. This is about really creating a wonderful brand story to position them. I mean, at the moment, I think last week we were at a conference and a woman spoke to say there's 85 million vacancies in the market at the moment. So how does your brand stand out, right? So I think that's a massive benefit retained office clients. And I also think, sorry to go on, but I just think I want to demystify the myth that retained is more expensive. It's not necessarily, right? And it can be cash flow management, because if you're paying in a let's just say what often people think of as the traditional way of a third, then a company can manage its cash flow a lot more effectively than a big hit to their cash flow all at once. So it doesn't have to be seen as negative. Ultimately, the fee will probably end up being roughly the same. It's just the way you're managing it. So there's loads of benefits that I could
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, Jackie. In building on that, it's amplifying EVP and building brand, employer brand. It's providing the client with really valuable research on their EVP if they do have an established brand, but providing those insights through the process back to the organisation around how their brand is perceived. We talk about the value in really an amazing job brief, which is so necessary for a retained assignment, and really leveraging the expertise that hopefully your consultants have to shape up that brief, to give views on the competitive nature of salaries, to give views on what others in the same industry are offering. I like to go out. So there's all of this amazing opportunity to consult back to the client, and that consultation, the insights, the research, the market map, the feedback on the scope and feedback on people who are, involved in the process. All of that is effectively consulting. It's providing insight and helping an organisation to really understand how attractive their proposition is. And in any other industry, that level of consultation, whether it be in management consulting or in other professional, of course, is something that organisations should pay for. In our situation, it does result in let's call it a placement, whatever it is, but the insights that can be provided in a really quality process start from the very first conversation you have with that client about their need. And it's amplifying those insights and the value of those to a client that would have them, of course, say, well, yeah, that is something that I would pay for, because it's ultimately going to improve my chances of attracting the best possible talent, which, as we know, is ultimately the key to our business success. So it's really feeling confident about being able to articulate that value, I think, is important.
So let me pick up on that point and put a question to Louise, because that confidence around articulating the value, and we can see there's so many benefits to a client. Like, I sit here thinking, why wouldn't a client go retained, right? It seems like the much more sensible way to go. And yet somehow there's this fear you touched on earlier, Louise. How do we actually help leaders have the right mindset? What kind of mindset do they need? How do they acquire and develop that shift to make it, particularly if this is new to them, if people watch it now and they haven't done this yet, how do you help them shift their mindset towards this, Louise?
Well, I agree with everything that both Jackie and Susie have said. It does bring immense value to the client and to the candidate and to the recruiter. But I have found that it isn't necessarily selling on the added value that has shifted me from contingent to retained. I was taught early on in my career how to sell retainers and value your worth and value your time, and it just didn't work for me. Maybe because I was young and I didn't actually value my worth and I didn't have that innate confidence. I wasn't experienced enough to do that yet. What I've found is that it really helps to see it as a solution. It really helps to see retained search, and not just retained search, but any retained solutions that can solve problems like talent mapping, talent pipelining, insight studies that Susie's touched on. I agree that it can be applied to any level of position, and I have worked on 20k positions and $500,000, $600,000 positions and everything in between. But fundamentally, if the client is having a great time using the contingent model, it's going to be quite difficult to convince them that they should be doing something differently. And what really helped for me was to see it as a solution to the problems and the challenges that are caused by the contingent model. So what I've actually found is that if you question clients quite effectively on, are you getting what you want when you want it? Is it an enjoyable process? Is the model that you're using at the moment working for you? That you find actually they're a bit frustrated with it, and they're either getting too many or not enough, or the quality's poor, or they're pissed off with agencies bombarding them all the time, or there's always some kind of whinge. And the more you get them to whinge about recruiters and the recruitment process, the better the position you're in to be able to say, oh, well, that's exactly how we feel as well. It's actually incredibly difficult delivering a great service on that basis. And there's a better way. And I'd like to talk you through that. And looking at it as a solution. So if you look at contingent being that no win, no fee, no commitment on either side, then inversely, the retained solution is that the financial commitment from the client enables us to put in place a robust process and commit to working to reaching a result. So that model solves a lot of the problems and the challenges that the contingent model doesn't. And that really helped me to sell it.
I love that. I've actually never thought about it that way before, Louise. And I think you're right, because, you know, as a leader in my business, in fact, I just said to one of our team, and she may be watching yesterday, why don't you value yourself more? And I think that's a really interesting point to think about, because if you try and flip it more on actually what are their problems and use it as the solution.
What are you trying to solve?
What are you trying to solve? That might help shift that thinking, where people are a little nervous about it from a backing themselves perspective.
Yeah, and going, I mean, we can go a little bit more advanced here, because you're all experienced, and some of the people listening will be too, in that it's very helpful when you're transitioning a new client or a client for the first time, that the problem is on their side. So some of the easiest assignments to win are those that are problematic, that are challenging and niche, or they've been using the contingent model and it hasn't yielded results. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you talk it through in this way for them to keep doing the same thing and expect something different to happen, especially when there's another way of working. And as long as you make it easy for them to step into the relationship, and you're calm and you're considered about the way that you talk it through, and you're not pushing money up front on them all the time, and it's the way that you do it, then it's relatively easy to do that. And actually, when you learn how to do it, it's very easy to do. But the other scenario is, of course, that it's us that's providing them a service, and this is an existing client that we're doing really good work for, actually, and we're busting a gut on a contingent basis. And a lot of people say to me, yeah, but there isn't a problem because we're solving it, because we're working night and day to solve the problem on a contingent basis. But it can work just as well when the problem is ours. As long as the client values what we're doing, i.e. they are getting what they want, and they're getting it when they want it, pretty much, and they want us to carry on doing that, then our justification is slightly different. But it's kind of based on the same reason, that we want to carry on doing this, but it's getting more and more challenging for us to do this because of the way the market's changing, or because of the way that talent's being sucked up by some of your competitors. I want to carry on doing this, but at the moment I'm working at risk. And so you're sharing that problem with the client.
Yeah,
I want to carry on doing it. In order to keep doing that, this is what some financial commitment from you is going to enable me to keep doing this. Can I show you how it works? So we can still transition those that haven't got a problem, if the problem's ours.
Thanks, Louise.
Excuse me.
Susie, let me ask you, we've all touched on the fact that various ways we think that Retain can be used across all sorts of different roles. And as I said right at the beginning, I used to think it was just for executive search. What's your view, Susie? Can it be done for any role? And are there any roles it can't be done for? Where would you sit on that one?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And we have had this debate a number of times internally. And I think what it really comes down to is, really building on the commercial acumen and confidence of the consultant as to whether or not they really do believe that they can fill the role. And that really comes down to, in that early stage in understanding what it is that the client wants, you have an opportunity to, as I said before, provide insight to shape up what is the right brief. There are definitely some instances where we have consultants say, I'm just not 100% confident that this is a role that we can fill. And now that, ultimately is not because we don't know where to search or whatever else, but it may be that there are some conditions or some aspects of the role that we believe will make it particularly challenging to find that right candidate for the client. Then a case, because we say if you're going to work retained, you are absolutely committing that you will do everything you take to fill that role. And it's very important for us to uphold our track record in working retained in order to be able to sell it again. So there are some instances where consultants would say, I'm going to ask for an engagement fee, so a smaller commitment to the first part of the process. And I'm actually going to trust in, what the client wants. They haven't perhaps completely adopted some of our feedback, but we're going to go to market and we're going to start testing, whether or not this particular role, whether it be based on the particular mix of skill sets that they want, it might be based on, the salary level that they are hoping to achieve, whatever it is. And we're going to take some time to go to market and start testing the aspects of the role, and we'll provide feedback to the client. And of course, we should be paid for that really important work. But in some cases, committing right up front to a retained role may not make sense from a profitability perspective, because it might be a case of saying, well, if we commit to this, and we've all had clients who are very difficult to recruit for, my sense is we could be working on this role for 6 months. Because perhaps they're not entirely clear, or perhaps certain aspects of the brief we're not sure are going to stick. So there are some cases where from a commercial acumen profitability perspective, it doesn't make sense for us to fully commit to a retained process? Or is it the case that we want to still have some commitment, but to agree with the client, we're going to go to market on this role for 2 weeks. We're going to provide you some feedback on how the market has received the role. And then together we can determine whether we need to think about a change in brief, or in fact, whether it might be the case that if the client is not open to our consultation, we might make the call to say, look, we think it's probably better to be recruited by someone else. Ultimately, here's our feedback on why we don't believe that the brief is going to be relevant. It happens in a few cases. It doesn't happen often, and in some cases we're proven right that we get to the end of that period. Other times it might be a new client where you're not 100% sure about how the partnership is going to play out. There might be some signs early that might have you just query whether or not that kind of the value in the partnership and the ways of working are going to mean that it's a process that is going to go well. And in some cases, consultants will come to us and say, this is it's a junior role. They're looking for someone quickly. I do think that I can fill it quite quickly. And therefore, rather than spend all the time in preparing proposals and going through a retained process, I've got 4 other retained roles on this occasion. I'm happy, just to work contingent. I think I can get it done. And we're currently probably 85% retained in our business. And I would say the balance of that percentage is where certain consultants in certain markets will say, commercially, this is one that I think I'll just get stuck into. We've got good relationship with the client anyway. I'm not going to retain it. But we still encourage to have some commitment in every case as much as we can.
That's interesting. We're also about 85% retained. Yeah. So I wonder if that's the kind of level where it ends up, if it's something that you work.
Yeah, I think when I joined, we were between 55 and 60%. Yeah. And you would hope in this market
that's got up.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that we were definitely heading north of that, and I would hope in the next time we look at this metric, would be closer to 90% in this market.
So Jackie, people sometimes say to me, yeah, that's all well and good, but what about either really junior roles, or what about blue collar roles, or what about large volume low transaction roles? Can you do retained? Is there any, are there any that are just a no, you can't do retained on that basis, in your opinion?
I would say there's no role that you can't do retained, unless, as Susie's just highlighted, there's some, circumstances where you're thinking, not sure that. But I would say volume, I would probably approach a little bit differently. I would probably look at that not so much as a retained option, but looking at a sort of project ways that you can price that and model it and do different solutions for. But no, I think one of the biggest things is demystifying the concept that retained is only for executive search. And when I started my career, that was the case. And part of that was driven by the market was very different. I mean, I'm picking at most of us sitting here as saying that, when we started, you put a job in the paper and people responded, right? And you reacted to that. And now every role, and I said this when I do our training with our team, every role requires a search. There is nobody just going, here I am, I'm ready for your role, right? So the amount of time and energy that we are, nurturing the candidates, nurturing clients, hunting out people, trying different things, managing that process, I think it can be applied to any role. Now, it'll require some tweaking, and it's hard for me to say exactly what those tweaks will be, because it'll be different depending on what your current model is to how you deliver your solution. But absolutely, it can be. We've done it for clients who might be just looking for a straight out, full stack developer. We've done it for clients who are looking for their chief executive, for growth officer. We've done it for performance marketing. it can be applied to a really wide range of roles. I probably would do it slightly different, as I said, for volume. I don't think it works quite the same. I think you do a project model, and we could talk about that at a later date, but I think it does apply to everything.
The thing that where we learned this, which I just find fascinating, our charity division, our division that recruits for the charity sector, we run that as a not-for-profit. Our fees on that are literally just done at a level so that we can provide the service to give back. And as a result, when we set that up in 2008, we said we can't work contingently because we can't afford to. We can't afford not to fill the roles we're doing because we're doing it as a not-for-profit model. And that showed us that you can do any role at any level. That was the bit that got us over that kind of headspace of it's just the executive search. So yeah, it's a really interesting kind of shift that you need to make to get there.
Absolutely.
Louise, when you sorry, go on, Jackie, you want to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say the other thing too is I think sometimes with the executive search previously in my past, they often touted it as this very long process. And so, you know, there was this view that it could take months and whatever, and people are sitting there going, crikey, I need my receptionist, can't wait months, so there's someone's got to be answering the phones. But I think it's going back and, you know, you reverse engineer it and look at what does that look like for that role and set realistic timelines and deadlines with the client about what they're going to do. So I think it's this repositioning perhaps your own mindset about what you've seen that look like in terms of process and timeline to make it relevant to the role you're recruiting for.
And that's another very common objection a client says, look, I appreciate that, we just don't have the time. And again, there's a good conversation in there around, you know, time versus, you know, quality and whatever else. But if working retained is the way that you work, then things like market maps and research and whatever, it should be there and live and ready to provide it. It shouldn't be the case that you're necessarily starting with a clean sheet of paper. If it is that you put your hand up and said, I'm the best partner for you on this particular role. But yeah, definitely this view that retained means this, you know, 6 weeks plus is another myth that, you know, you can kind of debunk, because a comprehensive search is not necessarily about time. It's about the depth of the IP and the depth of the, you know, the insights and, you know, ultimately you can arrive quite quickly if you're an expert in your field at a great shortlist. It doesn't have to be, you know, weeks and weeks of process to pad out something just to justify the value of
absolutely. And I think touching on it, Susie, is that whole concept previously with executive, you'd get this long list, you know, and I think, oh my God, all they've done is picked up 30 names off LinkedIn and whacked them in front of me. That's not long. So again, it's demystifying that if you actually know your market and know your space, you're going to go straight there and be able to identify maybe 4 or 5 candidates. So you think these are the people that need to be in front of you.
So Louise, let me put a question to you, and there's a question in the Q&A function as well, so I'm going to tie the two together. So someone from Future You has asked, no, I can't get it on my screen, but they've asked about the ideas on selling retained over exclusive in particular. So what, you know, how do you get clients to see that retained is better than exclusive? And also tied in that with that, Louise, when you're training on this, do you see that there are any other kind of BD opportunities that come out? Is that a benefit of retained? So maybe if I can put those two questions to you.
Yeah, sure. So exclusivity is better than multi-agency. Of course, we know that, but it's still contingent. I see so many people separate exclusivity from contingent work, and it's not. It's the same. There is no financial commitment. There's no commitment on either side. There's no commitment for us to fill the position. There's no commitment from the client to use us to fill that position. I don't know how many times I've worked on an exclusive basis only to find that I'm not working on an exclusive basis, or that actually they've decided they're just going to put a pin in it for a little while, or they're actually just going to change it and just do this. I'm been left high and dry. So not that we're mistrusting of the client's word in that it's only going to come to us. It's that we've been let down so many times on that basis before that it really is, we're taking all of the risk, and we are working completely at risk with no actual commitment from the client. And on that basis, there's only so much we can do. Well, there is only so much we can do. And in a market, especially like this, you were alluding, Jackie, to the amount of time, the amount of energy and the amount of effort we're having to do on every single position. Sadly, without that commitment, we can't do that. We can't guarantee that we're going to be able to do what we need to do to make sure that we reach a result. So yes, it reduces that risk slightly. The chances of us being able to do it go up slightly, but it was still going to have to juggle 7 different positions at the same time on an exclusive basis, because only, maybe 4 or 5 out of those 7 might come in instead of just 2 or 3. But we're still going to have to juggle all those different things and grade our jobs, which means the hardest ones are going to go to the bottom of the list, which is probably the one we're talking about, which means what's the sense in me taking it on if I can't absolutely say I can definitely, as you were saying, Susie, it's so important to be able to commit to making sure that we reach a result. So for me, exclusivity isn't enough, and that's how I would explain it to the client. But what we can do is make it normally the reason that a client is adverse to working on a retained basis instead of working and would rather say, well, I'll give it to you exclusively instead, is because they're worried about that financial commitment. So we can do things to make it easier for them to say, well, I'll tell you what, let me show you over 2 weeks what can be done and the progress that we can make on a retained basis. If you're not happy after the 2nd week, I'll stop the search and I'll reimburse the retainer. So it doesn't,
Sorry.
Well, we don't need, it doesn't need to be a huge leap of faith from the client or them just giving us a chunk of money and hoping that they get something back from it. We can de-risk it, particularly on the first project, to help make it easy to step into that kind of relationship.
So let me pick up on that de-risking piece, Louise, because it's typically, I'm sure everyone knows, but just to really spell it out, typically it would be first retainer on assignment of job, second retainer on presentation of shortlist, or even in this market might be one suitable candidate, you need to define that, clarify that, and third retainer on offer or start date, depending on where you sit on that. That's a sort of standard typical model. As you've said, there are different ways you can, you might offer look at kind of slicing it differently, or it's a bit of a way of playing around with that. But people that are listening, that are wanting to make this move, that haven't made the move already, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the pitfalls? Like, what can go wrong with it? So you're talking about de-risking. What do they need to be aware of so they don't fall into the trap?
One of the biggest things, and I was sort of itching to say it earlier, is that we can have this conception that because we've taken a retainer from the client, we have to produce the ideal candidate. We've got to fill it, and we've got to fill it with the ideal candidate, and that's what they expect from us. I think it's really important to go into this with the mindset of, and learn how to articulate this to clients, is to say, I can't guarantee that you're going to find your perfect candidate. I can't guarantee this candidate exists. I can't make people, right? I also can't guarantee that if we do find that perfect candidate, that they're going to want to come and work for you. I can't make people do something they don't want to do, especially in really niche markets, where we are wondering whether that's the question, whether that's a possibility. And then to talk about what we can guarantee. So I can guarantee that I can take a really thorough brief from you, that I can understand exactly what it is that you're looking for, that we can align that as best as possible with what exists in the market, and using our market knowledge, make it as feasible as possible. I can then guarantee that we will go out and we will cast a net over all of the possible candidates and systematically approach them with a really compelling message, and bring as many of those people to the table as is humanly possible to bring to the table. And I can guarantee at the end of the process, you'll be making your decision from all of those that are available to you in the market at this time. And you can even go one step further to say that if you decide that you don't want to make a hire from what's available to you right now, I want to go one step further and help you find an alternative solution, be that promoting someone internally, bringing someone in externally on a contract basis to coach that person into position, to look at pipelining future talent that isn't ready now but might be ready in the future, and all the different things that we can do to support them through the challenge that they're still facing.
I often use with clients an analogy that's very relevant in the Sydney housing market. I don't know how relevant it is in other markets, but I say to them, it's like when you're looking to buy a house. If in Sydney you want to buy a 4-bedroom detached house that's close to both the beaches and the city, and you've got $1 million, you could know by going to every contingent recruiter out there that's not feasible, but you won't get any more information than that's not feasible. If you work with me retained, I can't change the housing market for you. I can't suddenly make something happen that's not there. But what I can do is do a really deep dive for you to really understand what are the suburbs where you might get a slightly better deal, what are the compromises you might need to make, what can you do, what can't you do, how are you going to get the most value for what you're looking for, and where might you need to compromise, or where might you want them to compromise to end up, because we all know when we buy a house, we end up making some kind of compromise to get what we want.
That's right. And to be certain that you've seen everything. Yeah, it's right. On a contingent basis, clients do not know whether there's something better out there. There's no way of knowing whether there's something better out there. When you carry out a retained search process properly, they will be sure that they're making their decision from everything that is available to them. The other challenge, and the big challenge that I see, is that people get sucked into just work because they've taken a retainer. They just work it and work it and work it and work it and work it, and there's no end to it. And that's one of the big dangers of taking a deposit or taking an engagement fee. That's almost the worst of both worlds, because you haven't got the payment structure that's paying for that, but you've got a retainer, so you feel like you have to deliver. So you're almost putting yourself in a catch-22 where you're totally committed, but you're not going to get a second payment, but you've now got to work on it until what? Until you find somebody that doesn't exist. So I really advise using a process that maps out that timescale. I agree it doesn't need to be 8-12 weeks that the Shrek firms will use, but that's realistic in your market. Remember, we can only pull candidates through a process as fast as they will be comfortable to move through, but let's say it's 3-4 weeks to say, right, we'll take the brief in this week, we'll carry out the research in this week. By the end of this week, we're going to be presenting all of the candidates that are available to you and the results of our assessment with them. And at the end of this week, you're going to be making a decision on who you take to interview. And that's it. The search is done. And that we don't get sucked in to just keep going.
And that's the definitive timelines and deadlines, isn't it, around it, right up front, being honest with the communication and that level of transparency from the get-go. And that's where the brief is the most important piece, right?
It is also where it does get tricky, because I think if I think about situations, most common in terms of, what goes wrong, it's confidence in the process, acceptance of the shortlist, getting to a point where everything has led to, both parties, the consultant and the hiring manager saying, we know this is our preferred candidate, and for whatever reason that preferred candidate, it doesn't accept the job or whatever else, and then there's the where to from here conversation. Because ultimately you should have given the client full confidence that you have done everything in your power to make sure that you've mapped the whole market and provided that great candidate. What does where to from here look like? Is the expectation that you all of a sudden go back to the start and repeat that process, and where are the candidates all of a sudden coming from? Yeah, and so I think that's where consultants quite often get a little bit stuck. Is kind of like, I've spent 4 or 5 weeks working on this assignment. We've got all the way to the end. The candidate's rejected the offer. What is my commitment to effectively work another 4 weeks to potentially look for candidates that we know don't exist? And that's where that, the tricky kind of conversation comes in with a client. And that's often where consultation needs to start around, well, what do we need to think about doing differently? What is it perhaps about the brief or about the markets that we're looking at? Where can we compromise or think about transferability of skills? But also having some confidence to play out what does the next stage of the process looks like. And if it is a change in brief that has resulted from, an agreement that we need to think differently, it should also potentially warrant a conversation around, well, let's just talk about the commercial nature of us going back to market under a slightly different brief, and having confidence that is a conversation that you could have, so that you are not working an assignment for 6 months, which ultimately makes the exercise, really quite unprofitable. So I think that's another level of commercial acumen and confidence that candidates need to manage through a process when things go wrong. And as you said, Louise, not to ultimately say, well, now I'm committed and I'm going to effectively toil away at potentially working on an assignment that can't be filled if nothing else changes.
And let me just ask a question to Jackie that ties into that. So obviously there's a lot more commitment from us, and that's one of the big positives. But what does that mean for those doing this the first time, Jackie, in terms of maybe additional resources or additional costs? If you're just looking at trying this for the first time, to the point we very started with, it's not just about pay us up front and nothing else changes. What additional costs or resources do we need to be thinking about making sure we've factored into the process?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a hard one to answer, because I think it depends on what you currently do today and what model you have and how you're set up as a business to know whether, do you have, as Susie said, it shouldn't be a case of, I've got to go and map out the market every single time. If you've got that functionality already in-house, or you've got those tools, you may already, you should be able to execute and use them. But if you're starting from scratch and you have nothing, but in saying that, you're not going to need to map the market for every single opportunity. If I'm doing a reception role and I'm doing it retained, you should be able to move a lot quicker. I don't know that there's a lot of cost internally for a business to do retained, other than I would probably go and hire Louise right now and train all your staff, right? Because it is about the dialogue. It is about how you can articulate it. But then it's not just about dialogue, because we've all had someone give us a good spiel but then not deliver. So it's also about what training and investment have we made as a business with our people to get them to a stage where they can have those commercial conversations. And it is commercial acumen. Everybody's touched on it today: commercial acumen. I would ask, what do we do in our business today to measure our consultants' commercial acumen? What does that look like? What do we need it to look like? So I think the investment is probably not so much about delivering the retain. The investment is that step before, probably, Nina, in terms of investing in our people to get them to that level of confidence and build their skill base.
Can I add to that, Nina? I wholeheartedly agree with you, Jackie. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around needing expensive software or expensive outsourced research or tools, and that's not what I did, and not what I do, and not what our members do. So there's no need. Yes, you can get lost in all of that, but the reality is you don't need to make those kinds of investments. But it is about giving people the tools and the confidence to be able to do it. I can't tell you how many business leaders have come to me and said, well, I've told them they've got to sell retainers, but they're not doing it. But they've not been taught how to do it. They haven't been given the clarity of what it is that we're doing here and why clients would choose to do this over going down a contingent. And they've not been given the narrative, and they've not been. So it's not fair to expect people to be able to do this without giving them the support and the training, whoever does that, to be able to do it.
I would agree with that. I mean, I joined a business where it wasn't really an option. It's like, I was trained, this is how we go to market. This is effectively, and having not worked in recruitment before joining 6 Degrees, I was like, that makes perfect sense to me. And it was opposite. It was like, so why is it the case that some people might, work on a contingent basis? It was the reverse. But cost-wise, absolutely, learning and development, not just for new joiners, but consistently in terms of how can we deliver a really modern retained process? Because as you said, it was probably when I joined, you map it out over 6 weeks and you do all this kind of manual compilation of long lists and all that kind of stuff. And clearly there's efficiencies now in how information is collected and presented to a client. Some of that enabled by technology, some of it just enabled by smarter ways of working. So, and I think if we didn't work in a space that we did and work, predominantly retained, we probably wouldn't have as many kind of research or talent engagement roles in our business, because the reality is we probably couldn't afford to, because we would be doing lots of work that we weren't getting paid for. So working retained and really protecting, the value proposition allows us to invest in working retained better and getting better outcomes. So it kind of feeds that ecosystem of how ultimately, we position ourselves in the market.
And Susie, you talked then, sorry, Jackie, I'll come to you because I'm going to ask you this question and you can make your point in it, because you talked then about the training and making sure our people understand and not really giving them a choice. But I actually think it's better for our people. I think it helps their careers, it helps their confidence, it helps them. And Jackie, you started right at the beginning about talking about how much your engagement levels have gone up. So I'd love to obviously feel free to make the comment you're about to make, but also just to hear about how you actually think it helps our people. For those of us that are leaders, how does it help our consultants?
Yeah, great. Because I was just saying, look, I think a few things. I think it makes recruitment more enjoyable. I think it doesn't matter what job you do, you don't get up to go to work each morning and not be successful, right? We all want to have a sense of achievement. And so if you're slogging and I think, as Louise, you said, you got 7 or 8 jobs you're juggling, and 1 comes off or 2 comes off. Yeah, okay, you get a little excitement, but hey, it's a lot of free work, right? And I said to someone the other day, if you've got a fill rate of 10% or 20%, 80% of the time you're working for free. It's not a good feeling, right? It's not doesn't excite anyone really. So I think you start to have a higher degree of sense of achievement. I think from a business perspective, the commercial acumen comes into, because you can forecast better as a business. You know when revenue is going to happen. You know what's happening. You're not sort of doing this and hoping something's going to happen. You really are, and this has probably been something that I've embraced since the day I entered recruitment, is that our title's consultant. And so we're raising the level of consulting skills. And I think when you talk about the brief and getting it right, and Susie gave examples of sometimes when it doesn't go right and you talk through things with your client, I think this is where you really have to have people can consult. And I can give you an example. I had to go to New York for a client who wanted to hire 6 VPs. And I'll be really honest, I won't say the name of the client, but they had a problem of sexual harassment in their leadership team. And they particularly wanted to focus on hiring female VPs. We couldn't dance around that topic. You've got to put it on the table. I'd done my research and said, listen, this is, before we even talk about going to market, this is you're going to face. What's your response? What are you truly doing as an organization about it? You have to and I'm not saying that conversation is going to come up every time, but you have to be able to upskill your consultants to have those tough conversations and have business conversations, not recruitment conversations, right? And I think, and that's when the job, ironically, I think is even more enjoyable, because you're then seen as a partner in that business and you feel like you're making a difference, right? And I think that's, for us, that's the light bulb moments when you see people succeed in those moments and they're like, you see them just grow fully as a person, and they start to bring a different insight back into your own business about the way we operate as a business and see things quite differently. And I think if we can really bring the word of consultant to life, then I think we've succeeded as an industry.
And sorry, Susie, you go.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think who wants to come to work every day, work for free, ultimately be consistently hustling to to really see the value in what you're doing. So of course, anything that smooths out the volatility of billings is a good thing. But more than that, it's really have pride and confidence in the value that we provide. And amplifying that value by getting paid for that consultation, for me, is ultimately empowering for individuals who join the business, regardless of whether they're working at a junior level or whether they're recruiting C-suite. So I think it's absolutely critical to have people in the organization who really get up every day and believe that they add value and know that they add value because they get paid for that great work that they do. I'm not surprised, Jackie, that that's had a massive impact in terms of overall engagement, because that is the key to engagement. People coming to a business where they're thriving and where they ultimately have, belief in the value and purpose of what they do. So it's ultimately important in my opinion.
Thank you, Susie. And we're moving towards the end of time. So just to encourage, if you do have a question, feel free to pop it on the Q&A, because we're just moving into the last 5 or so minutes of the webinar. So if you have a specific question you'd like to ask the panel, please feel free to pop it in there. Louise, I'd like to ask you, you're training people on this every day. We've talked a lot about the consultants needing commercial acumen now being one of the key skills for this, but what other skills do you see that people need to be able to do retained well?
Yeah, good question. Lots of things can be taught. Can you hear me okay, by the way? Yeah, I had to switch my headset, my earphones ran out. So lots of things can be taught, but there are some fundamentals that I'm always looking for that recruiters need to have. And that's being able to listen. Being able to listen really effectively, because as I've alluded to before, I found that the success for me of selling all kinds of and all the different types of retained solutions that I've sold has really lay in discovering the challenge and how well the models that they've used before or they are using is fulfilling that, and being able to use that in recommending my solution. And if you can't listen, then you can't solution sell. So that's the biggest thing for me. I think the other thing is, and I don't know that it's really a skill, is caring. Is actually really caring about the outcome and about the client and about their work. And some people don't. You know, some people are just in it for the money, and they are just in it to throw a few CVs and hope that something sticks. That kind of consultant isn't going to do well with this. It doesn't matter how much you spend on training. That if they don't genuinely care about what they're doing and about their clients, then you're wasting the investment. So those are the two key things that I'm really looking for in consultants.
I love that. Thank you, Louise. We've had a question come through from Karen, who wants to know about how you go about pricing retained work when contrasted with contingency rates. So I can only talk for ourselves, Karen, but we actually make it marginally cheaper, a couple of percentage points cheaper, because we know we're getting paid, rather than, so we actually do charge more for contingency on a percentage basis. What about the others? Susie, how do you?
Yeah, I think there are, again, we do empower consultants quite a lot in terms of negotiating rate based on the very specific circumstances of a particular assignment. There was definitely a trend whereby selling retained was a means of providing effectively a discount, but we've kind of, trained for that not to be the default, and to say, well, it shouldn't be about the focus on it'll be done at a lower rate, although in some cases that probably does make sense, because in a sense it kind of depreciates the value of what you're trying to establish as far as the recruitment process itself. So we price the job, or we rate the fee based on a bunch of different considerations, our standard terms, our history with the client, but how much work we have on, all those factors that come to what is a great pricing negotiation. And then the retained is just the model of, that pricing is applied. So, but I would be lying if I said that there wasn't instances where, where we knew that, providing a 1 or 2 percentage point reduction for a client who perhaps has not had that experience of working with us, where we're trying to bring them into being confident to work retained. As we know, it's very hard to go back from that though. So we are actively trying to take that off the table as a means or a reason why people would choose to go retained. So that's just how we work, and our fee is our fee.
Thank you. And so, Jackie, what about you?
Yeah, very similar to what Susie's saying, but at times we have done that exactly that and offered a slight discount. I think actually more important than the pricing sometimes with retained is the terms, the other terms. So what have you actually committed to, your timelines? What does a shortlist look like? What is that acceptance like? If you're doing a model of saying, as we said, a third on your brief and a third on shortlist, I think some organisations I've seen get caught out with actually defining what a shortlist actually looks like. What is it? Is it the presentation of that shortlist? Is it acceptance of that? Is it the interview of that? It's all those sorts of things that I think, because I it's a bit like Susie, your price is your price, and how you slice it and dice it gives you freedom to move. But what's the other terms around that? What happens when they don't accept the shortlist, and what does that look like, and what's the investment, etc. So I think it's the other terms that are just as important to get right.
And I think what constitutes a cancellation too, because we've all had scenarios where we've picked up the retainer, worked for 2 weeks to get to effectively a shortlist, and then the proposal, or sorry, the assignment is cancelled, and making sure you've got really clear terms around that cancellation, which might mean that you still get that second third of the fee if it is that the assignment's been taken off the table. But yeah, I agree with Jackie.
And things like if they've thrown an internal candidate at the last minute or anything like that, you may decide to charge for that, so it's nutting all that out at the beginning. So I call it the no surprises recruitment where possible.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of that as well, Jackie. I'm a huge fan, and I'm a big fan of the frustration clause as well. If the client does anything to hinder our work or to preclude us from reaching a result on the assignment, then we reserve the right to terminate the project, and that under cancellation would incur a cancellation fee. So the terms are so important, and Jackie, I'm a huge fan of putting that out on the table right at the very beginning. We want to have a successful relationship here, so we don't want there to be any surprises. Let's talk about all the what ifs, so that we're really clear on what this looks like. But the thing is, like I said before, if you do that too soon, then you're going to frighten them off. So it's about timing,
how you
and positioning that.
Now,
It's-
ladies, I'm very
it's at
conscious of
expectations. Sorry,
time.
go.
Sorry, Jackie, I'm very conscious of time because we're at 10:29. We're about to tick over. We've had a couple of other questions come through, which we won't get to, but they do come on to, yes, to the next point tomorrow. So thank you for your questions. So Tamara's asked if we can share a sales pitch. Now, I will call out that we haven't got quite into the how do you actually, like the day-to-day how of it. And so we are just going to run a quick poll now, because clearly we could talk about this for hours and hours. So we're going to run a quick poll to see if those of you watching would be interested in, you know, a further workshop to get into the next steps around this. But I would also refer you to our Retain a Recruiter playbook, which will come out. So we have created a playbook which does go a bit more into the detail of the how as well. And obviously Louise has a whole business that trains on this, so there is a lot of the how that can work around this as well. But I would encourage you to download the playbook. If you don't know where to get that, there will be an email that will come around and post this webinar with a link, so you can download that Retain a Recruiter playbook, which will give you a bit more of a how. And if you complete that poll, then that will also give us an idea of whether we should run a further webinar. So I think everyone has done that. So what I will do now that it's 10:30 is just say thank you to our fabulous panelists. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jackie, all the way from Singapore. You've got your whole day ahead of you, so appreciate you sharing the insights you've shared there. Louise, thank you so much. I appreciate it's now 1:30 in the morning. Is that right? Have I got that right for you?
That's
so
correct.
You.
Yeah,
You're a
Staying
legend.
up late, you are a legend, and I certainly think that we can all learn a lot from the training you do. So I really appreciate you joining.
thank you.
And Susie,
Thanks for having me.
you're more than welcome. Susie as well, thank you for sharing your insights. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I could talk for hours on this subject, very passionate about it. But thank you very much. Lovely to see you all. I hope that was useful to everyone.
Thanks for having
Bye,
me.
Brad. Have a
Thank you.
good
Bye,
day.
everyone.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.